Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brief overview and demo of the Next Gen Rally. My name is Chris Brähler. I'm the Chief Product Officer at SDVI, and I'm very happy to talk to you about and show you Next Gen Rally. Before we get into Next Gen Rally, what is Rally and why is there Next Gen? So Rally is a media supply chain management and orchestration platform that is used by some of the biggest names in M&E, both in US and in Europe, to automate and optimize their media supply chains. So they essentially automate their full end-to-end operations and are realizing some immense agility and efficiency gains there. So why are we adding a next generation to that? Because you always need to innovate and you can never just rest on your laurels. So with that in mind, we looked at what we have and looked at what can we do better. So essentially, two themes really came out of that investigation. One is simplicity. So supply chains are complicated, and if you have media operations, I don't need to tell you that. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made, and automating those decisions needs logic and people that implement that logic. And our customers have said they would like to increase the number of people within the organizations that are able to build supply chains and connect building blocks together and automate what they needed to do without having them all go through a centralized team that builds them for us. So in that case, simplicity is a big driving factor in this. And the second pillar is AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, because we wanted to build a version of Rally that is able to live and be embedded in an agentic environment where agents can interrogate the system, but also build supply chains, put building blocks together, and in situations where something is needed quickly, just send something out, deliver something to their endpoints in a very quick manner without human interactions. So essentially, we wanted a simpler system that can also be built and monitored by Gen AI. So with that having said, let's look at it and see what we've come up with. What we have here is Next Gen Rally. I've already opened a supply chain, and you can see the screen is split in half. On the left-hand side, you see a structured text YAML representation of the supply chain. That's the complete end-to-end supply chain with all the instructions and everything is encapsulated in this text here. And on the right-hand side, you see a graphical representation of that YAML. What we store in the system is this, but the YAML gets rendered on the fly. And the operator that are building supply chains can work in either one of those systems. They can just work in the graphical view, or they can just work in the YAML view, or they can work with the split screen in both at the same time. So you might want to drag something in the canvas over here by saying, I want to create a API call somewhere, so you just drag it on there, but then you find it quicker instead of working in the panel view over here, you can then change the text in here if you want to. So whatever is the best way for you to operate these supply chains, you can choose to do so. And that immediately increases the number of people that can build supply chains, because if you want to build them in a graphical view, you can. If you want to build them in a more text structural view, you can as well. And that's also where obviously the Gen AI comes into, because Gen AI loves structured text. They love YAML, they love Markdown, and that's what we have in mind when we build this system. So what is this supply chain on the screen here? You can see it says a transcode demo. So essentially you can see I have two inputs over here, a file and an asset ID. And then I go out to let's say a scheduling system or another contract management system to get information about this asset ID. And in this case, I'm getting the content type. And then based on that information, I decide what kind of transcode I want to do, because my episodic material perhaps gets a different transcode than my cinematic material. And at the same time, I will create an asset, create a proxy for the asset if it doesn't exist already, and then also add the source file and the transcoded output to that asset. So that's essentially what this little test supply chain does. So all of this is encapsulated in this graphical view here, or you can see over here. So conceptually, what this is an outcome-based supply chain design. What I tell Rally is what I want the output to be. I don't necessarily need to tell it how and which order it needs to happen. I can, and I can limit the execution if I want to. But from a simplicity point of view, all I need to tell is the actions that I want the supply chain to do, which is why these things are under a action header. You can, for example, see here, there's an action called mezzanine episodic, because that's the mezzanine transcode from the episodic content. And you can see that runs a call, that runs a sub-supply chain. And I only do that when the content type is episode. And then I have a mezzanine film, but I only do if the content type is feature film. So that's how I can very simply route my traffic or my content through the supply chain. And once again, I can double click on the mezzanine episodic over here and do the same thing in the graphical builder as well. And with this, all I do is I say, I want this action, I want this action needs this on the input and creates this on the output. And then the graph on the right-hand side builds itself. The supply chain can build itself, and the system can then at runtime also decide what needs to happen when. If a file is already there, and for this task, I only need this one file, let's do it, right? So this is essentially the principle here. Another big principle in here is, once again, from a concept of simplicity and widening the number of people that have access to supply chain building, is this concept of calling a supply chain from within another with a very simple function here. You can see here, as I said earlier, I have this little blob over here that reaches out to a third-party system and then goes and gets metadata back. So this is something that often is internal to a customer. They have their own scheduling system that they've built, their own contract management, their own channel planning system. So it's not a publicly available API. So building connectors to this is not something a vendor can do in a vacuum. But as we want our customers to be able to build these things themselves and continue to do so like they do in Rally today, you still have the ability to build these custom integrations yourself. So this little sub-supply chain that gets the content type can be built by the very techie people, the DevOpsy people, the engineering people within an organization. And you can see this is also a very simple supply chain. It goes out and creates an API URL, then sends a call to the actual API and then returns the metadata key. And you can see in here, there's even some Python coding I can do in here, because sometimes still, if I write something in a scripting language, I can do certain operations much quicker. So we don't want to take away that power from our customers. So in this case, they can build their own little integration. And on top of this, you can see at the top here, they put a description in here, what this little supply chain does. If I go back to my supply chain over here and see my get content type over here and say I'm only in my graphical view and bring the documentation in, I can then click on the get content type, and on the right-hand side, get exactly the information that my colleague has put into that supply chain part. That way, I can now see, oh, okay, I need to give it an asset ID and a metadata key of what kind of metadata field I'm interested in, and then I get the metadata value back. And then I can use this in my next step in the supply chain to decide what I need to do. So this is the concept of this. I'm now standing in for the non-technical user. I can drag this in. I don't need to write any Python. I can just use this custom to each customer supply chain definition in my overarching supply chain. And this way I can just drag and drop these on this canvas, combine them and say, like, this input needs to go to this output. I can just drag these things around and build my supply chain that way. So that is a big, big, big benefit of the new system. Another thing I want to show is, by quickly moving into another supply chain here, is we looked at manual tasks. What we have within the Rally system already today is what we call a work order. Work order are manual tasks within a supply chain that can't be done by automation yet. We talked about AI before. So you have something like a manual QC. Someone needs to check a metadata field for validity because it says something that was unexpected by the supply chain. So you can already today in Rally create a task and work order that gets assigned to a user. That user goes in and gets presented with a front end that you can build yourself with a WYSIWYG editor called in Rally Gateway. And then you can show them the asset, show them the metadata that needs updating, show them the video, show them the subtitles, show them whatever you need the manual task to be. And then off it goes. And the supply chain continues once the user has done what they needed to do. This is very guided. The user is guided through the whole experience. They see their prioritized list of work orders, what they need to work. So it has a lot of efficiency gains already. But it needs a gateway built for every single task that you want to do, because you need to put the UI elements in place for us to render them in Rally Gateway. So we changed this in the next gen Rally as well, because again, agility and speed is very, very important. You want to be able to simply build supply chains quicker without needing to build a gateway and then needing to sync the gateway inputs to your supply chain and so on and so on. So now we have the concept of tasks within the next generation, where I configure what I want to do in a task, which you can see on the left-hand side here. Again, I'm doing that in the YAML just for convenience sake. Obviously, again, it's available in the graphical view as well. But in here, I have a task that I created to submit content. This task happens to be at the start of supply chain, so it's a trigger. I can obviously have that task in the middle of the supply chain as well. And then here you can see I have my submit content task. I have a little description for the task as well. And then I created 2 subtasks. I want to have someone upload the video with some formats and a media specification that they need to adhere to. And now I want them to give me some asset metadata. So I configure this in my configuration here, and then I'm building the rest of the supply chain out. Again, this will do a QC based on the upload, creates an asset as well. All of these steps happen in the supply chain later on. But here, I then want to go and look at what actually happens if an operator now needs to do this. I haven't built any UIs, right? I just have configured the task as I wanted, and I called that contribute media, right? So you can see here, because it's a trigger, I have a button to start this supply chain as an operator by clicking on the contribute task icon here. And now this view renders for me. I just configure as an engineer, essentially, or supply chain builder, what my operator needs to do, and then the UI gets built automatically. You can see I have an upload widget over here. I can have a previewer over here as well, and I have this asset metadata over here. All of this is available in there. I can then drag a video in here. The media spec gets checked automatically for me, and then I can save the task and continue the supply chain. So a very, very easy way of implementing manual tasks within the supply chain, just like in Rally today. But I don't need to build UIs anymore. The system builds the UIs for me on the fly based on what kind of actions I want my task to include, what I want my operator to do. So that's essentially the update to the task system. And then lastly, really quickly, because I talked about the AI aspects of this, and I teased that a little bit when we talked about the YAML. So we talked about this being an outcome-based supply chain design. We talked about the ability to essentially have pre-built blocks that either SDVI ships, like I want to run a QC, I want to run a transcode with transcoder ABC. These are just built-in functionalities that I can just drag onto the canvas, and then I can build my own and to put my own definitions on top of this and build little sub-supply chains that I can call. In this case, I can build them, vet them, make sure they are all right. And now, again, a user can drag them in there, or AI can, because again, this is a structured text file. AI loves structured text files. I can put descriptions, just like in my get content type, of what the inputs and outputs of these actions are and what they need and what they produce. So AI can read that as well. So they can essentially say, hey, I need to deliver this series to this destination endpoint. What do I need? I need to find the series. Do I have a block for find series? Do I need to have a block to transcode it? Do I need to have a block to deliver it to endpoint A? All of those things might be blocks that I've already tested, vetted as a human, but then the AI basically just grabs these things together, throws them into a file and ships them off. And the whole system is available to do this. So with this all in mind, that's what we have in the building of the supply chain, the simplicity of the supply chain. What we also have in the system as well is a new and exciting way of how do I monitor these supply chains. So over here, if I click on an actual run of a supply chain, you can see what decisions were made in the supply chain. And you can see this was a film. So it didn't do the episodic, it did the film and it created it, and it is still creating the proxy. But I can now move this back in time by moving the slider back and look at the supply chain as it happened an hour ago, or 2 hours ago, 5 minutes ago, depending on how long the supply chain runs. But not only am I able to go back in time as well, I can see my supply chain obviously in the YAML as well, and say like, oh, okay, this content type now, as you can see, evaluated as a feature film. That's actually wrong. So now how about I can go in here and change the value of this while the supply chain is essentially already finished running, and then say like restart this from this point, but change this to episodic. So I actually needed to run the episodic instead. Call this a rewind. And this is possible in the system as well. So we've looked at also monitoring supply chains and pushing important assets through the system and how we can make this better and easier as well. So those are just 2 quick peeks into both the building of supply chains and the monitoring of supply chains on NextGen. As I said in the beginning, it's a brief overview. If you are interested in learning more about this and hearing more about, again, how it's simpler build supply chains and how they can integrate with Gen AI, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to give you more information. Thank you so much for your time.